Welcome back, fellow sleuths. It's Chris and Rob, and we are glad to be back talking about From since last week we had to skip due to being in the path of Hurricane Milton. But let's dive into episode 4 because there is a lot to cover. From Victor's unearthed memories, the colony house craziness, including Fatima, and what we believe Tabitha's journey actually means for Fromville.
So let's start with Victor. After thoroughly roasting Sarah, even though she was willing to help him with his thought experiment, we're starting to see a breakthrough in Victor's memories. Jasper, was the missing item that Victor was unable to hold on to after the massacre when he was a child. He had saved a cigarette case and the watch of those that had been killed, but he distinctively remembered the ventriloquist dummy that Christopher always had. A dummy that Victor stumbles onto, having a full-blown conversation with Christopher.
And I think this scene explained why Victor had a panic attack after seeing the dummy while in the tunnels with Tabitha. I think we assumed it terrified him because it reminded him of Christopher. But it seems now that he's actually afraid of the dummy itself. But this scene also leaves us with two questions. One, how did Jasper get back down into the tunnels? Was it Christopher's last act? Or can Jasper move more than just his mouth? And will interrogating Jasper require a puppeteer, someone to connect with it? And if so, what would it do to that person after connecting with the evil? Another key takeaway from Victor's conversation with Sarah was his insinuation that both Miranda and Eloise were dead, although he makes it painfully clear to Sarah that he was not the one that unalived them. But this goes against the widely accepted theory that Eloise escaped, or at minimum, made it into the bottle tree, since he specifically mentions finding his mother's body by the tree, but makes no mention of Eloise. However, the show leaves some room for doubt because we are told after the massacre there were so many bodies he was unable to bury them all, which prompted the boy in white to step in. In other words, Victor is assuming Eloise is dead for the same reason the town assumed Tabitha was dead. Meaning she could have made it out, or at least was sent somewhere else in Fromville. Maybe even the old cabins where Kenny, Christie, and Jade are beginning to open up to each other, specifically Jade's visions and his encounter with our one-eyed friend. I think it's also worth noting that Jade first sees him pinned to the tree with a metal rod in his eye, but after he pulls the metal rods from the totems to save Christie, he then sees him free from the tree without the rod in his eye. So the question is, did Jade let something worse loose by trying to save Christie and breaking down the totem talismans?
Now let's jump to Colony House, where Fatima is taking her pregnancy cravings to another level. We believe this is a pretty concrete answer that Fatima is actually pregnant, and the need for the rotten crops and blood is what's keeping the baby healthy.
And we know not everybody thinks Fatima is pregnant, but based on her new eating habits that Rob mentioned, and what we see as a clear homage to Rosemary's Baby, and even a twisted parallel to an Immaculate Conception situation, we believe she is.
Now that being said, because of that, it's also pretty clear to us that it's not a fully human baby. She clearly knows that something's not right with the child, and we may be looking at a bit of the Omen situation with the town's version of Damien.
And should the child end up being part of the town, there may very well be a time soon where Ellis and Fatima have to make an almost impossible decision. A decision that could play out a few different ways. The town could turn against Fatima and her baby. Or possibly Ellis needs to make a horrible decision, not unlike what Boyd was forced to do when Abby became a threat to the town. Or maybe Fatima sees herself and the baby as a threat and makes the ultimate sacrifice. And of course, there's always a scenario where Fatima and or Ellis decide to save their baby and make a break for it, especially after hearing that Tabitha was able to make it out of Fromville. With that said, we get our closest look at the Banshee Woman this episode, and we think this encounter confirms we were correct in thinking she isn't a threat. Now, we know her being Fatima is a wildly popular theory, despite it being a different actress and a different culture's clothing. However, we can't rule it out completely. So we think maybe, if one of those unfortunate scenarios we talked about rings true, the deed may be done with the water at the lake, causing the current appearance that she has. Now let's jump over to Jim, because his last call with Evil Thomas begs the question, if they aren't his kids anymore, whose kids are they? Did the evil imprint on the Matthews kids? Are they going to turn to the dark side? Or is this another ploy for the evil to continue to drive a wedge through their family and chip away at Jim's tentative grip on things right now? Also, when Jim rips the phone with no cord off the wall, we see he is wearing the bracelet, which means there are more than one existing at the same time. This throws a wrench into a potential bootstrap paradox, and for those who don't know what that is, it's worth looking up for this show because it probably is very important. But essentially, it causes an item to have no definitive origin point.
One thing we had assumed was similar to the conservation of energy, and that it can't be created or destroyed.
Right, because even if the bracelet's in a continuous loop, it should still degrade over time.
By Jim wearing the bracelet in town while a new bracelet is introduced, how is this going to work? Chris and I just really want to see what happens if they come into contact with each other. Are they just going to spontaneously combust? This is one of our big mysteries going forward.
More important than the bracelet, though, Henry is now in town with Tabitha, which leads into our theory of what is happening within Fromville and the real purpose of her journey. Now, we know the motivation of the townspeople is to get home, but we also know the monsters are also stuck there. Based on Jasmine's comments to Porn Stash, who caused the Colony House massacre, and the nursery rhyme, which means they may have their own motivations for what they're doing. They almost seem to work as third-party contractors for the evil because they have some information, like the ambulance will arrive, and they planned accordingly for that, but they are unable to find people that are hiding in bushes, so they must not be the same entity that's on the phone and the radio who seems to know everything that's going on. And although they sound more feral, they act more organized. Like they have to follow a set of rules as well. They had Boyd, everyone in the ambulance, and Randall dead to rights, but decided to make an unnecessary deal with Boyd for what seems like the purpose of just breaking him further, which obviously seems to be working.
So the overarching theory is that they know the rules better than the townsfolk, as we clearly see from the monster telling Randall that the talismans don't work just by holding them up, and their end goal is to win the game and be released from this state of being a monster. These people from the 1950s iteration become the monsters for Victor's 1970s iteration. However, by Victor, and as we've said, potentially Eloise, still being alive, these monsters are still trapped in this extremely long cycle, leading to the weather changing unexpectedly and the continued addition of new people. The most important, however, being Henry now. The boy in white informed Tabitha that this was the only way before sending her to Camden with Victor's lunchbox. Tabitha needed to bring Henry back to town and reunite him with Victor and Eloise to in turn end this cycle one way or another. So this ongoing game that seems to be happening, these monsters would be freed into potentially the next wave of reincarnation potentially, while the current townsfolk become the monsters for the next cycle. So in a way, potentially the best and fastest way to win is to lose as fast as possible. Become the monsters and then do everything in your power to achieve the monster's goal. That would get you released and continue into the cycles.
Of course, maybe there is a loophole. Maybe that's what the boy in white's intentions were when sending Tabitha out into the real world. Maybe the person in Tabitha's role can end the cycles by freeing the children, or maybe they're in a causal loop where the future event is the cause of the past event, which in turn is the cause of the future event. Both events exist in space-time, but their origin cannot be known. And I know that's kind of mind-melting, but the causal loop paradox may be very important to the show, so I think it's worth looking up. But what do you all think of this? How does the touch, break, and steal rhyme still play into everything? Maybe we as fans have been looking at it wrong the whole time, trying to find out what Randall, Julie, and Marielle did, when really it's predicting what they will do. As usual, we want to end the show with a question. Do you think Henry is the Yellowman? Could his yellow house and yellow air freshener be subtle hints or nothing more than coincidence? And that'll wrap up this episode. As usual, we want to hear your thoughts, and if you have topics and questions we didn't cover, drop them in the comments so we can discuss them.
And if you like what we're doing, let us and the algorithm know by liking and subscribing. It helps out the channel and we really appreciate it. So until next time, stay sleuthy.